What's going on, guys? It's Matt with Payne's Custom Carpentry, and today we're building a floating shelf. So it's going to go in our laundry room. We did a little, I won't call it a remodel, just kind of refinished it, made it nicer. Um, so all the tools I use today will be linked in the description. So what's nice about this method of floating shelves is you can essentially make it to whatever size you want. Um, it doesn't matter if you use the 3/4 inch birch plywood like I'm using here. You can make it a little lighter, smaller, use 1/2 inch. You can use sanded plywood, maple, all kind of different stuff. But today I am using this 3-inch Baltic birch, or I'm sorry, 3/4 inch Baltic birch. Now I'm using my Makita track saw to break down these sheet goods. It's a 36 volt double battery cordless track saw. It just makes it easier so you don't have to pick up that huge sheet of plywood and try to carry it, put it on that table saw, which you can. There's no issue with that. But it's easier for me, a single man operation, to use this track saw. Also, if you don't have a track saw, there's a bunch of good jigs out there for using a circular saw, and it works just as good. I think Matt Outlaw over at 731 has a few videos on if you don't have a track saw using that circular saw jig. So the most important part of this entire build is honestly just making sure you have nice and clean 45-degree cuts. The reason is when you fold it all together, you want it to come together seamless, and you don't want to have a lot of big gaps. Once I got everything ripped down to manageable pieces, I like to go over to the table saw and I cut everything a little big on the track saw just in case it isn't completely 45. But as you can see there, I always use a digital angle finder and a combination square, not a combination square, a speed square, just to make sure everything is 45. And I like these Jessam stock guides you'll see on the fence rail. What those do is you set it to whatever depth or whatever thickness your board is. And like I said, I'm using this 3/4 inch Baltic birch. And those two rollers you see there, it pulls the board down into the fence and forward. So that way it doesn't slide around, it doesn't kick back, and it can only go straight. You can't pull it back, and you don't have to use as much downward force as you would without them. Right, so like I said, link will be in the description to those as well. So right now I'm just doing a dry fit test, and you see everything's a little wonky. I built the brace by myself, not by myself, but I built the brace myself. Just because this is going in my house and it's not going anywhere. But what I like to do, I like to use Shepherd brackets, and I'll put a link to them as well. They build actual weld steel hollow floating shelf brackets. Whenever I'm doing commission work floating shelves, I always use them. They're the best I've found. Quick turnaround, usually 5-10 days, and very customizable. So shout out to them as well. I've also had a few questions about that little piece on the end of my Makita track saw rail guide. That's actually a square. It's a 90-degree square essentially that clips onto the Makita track saw guide or the rail. And what it does, you put it on that square end of the plywood. You only have to do one measurement instead of both ends. Throw it on there, and it just keeps it 90 for you throughout the entire cut. And you can even clamp the end if you wanted to, but it's not necessary. And so in this build, essentially all we used as far as tools was the track saw, table saw, and a Porter cable nail gun. All that's pretty cheap. You can use your budget circular saw or just a standard circular saw. You can use a job site table saw. I ran with a Ryobi table saw for a year or two before I upgraded to this Delta. like I said, any tool will work as long as you have it 45. And other than that, you're pretty solid. Gonna have a nice shelf. So if you're building these by yourself, the easiest technique I've found to get them together essentially is to use a good duct tape. I use Gorilla duct tape, and I tape the ends right here that the angle is on, and then you get that middle piece, uh, put it right there on the tape, and it's going to be a little off, but you put that brace in, put the tape down, tape the piece all together, and then you can flip it over, put your wood glue in there, and then you'll see it come together. I'm using Titebond 3 on this, but you can use Titebond 1 or 2, standard wood glue. It's going inside, and Titebond 1 and 2 are perfectly strong enough for this application. In a second, you'll see I have to get my wife out here just to help me keep everything straight and get the glue up perfect. So I go with the nail gun, and she'll come up behind me, clean it up, and kind of use that little screwdriver trick to round over the 45s just a little bit to get all those little gaps closed up. But this one was 7.5 feet long by 12 inches deep, so it's a pretty big and heavy shelf. And you can see right here, I just take my time going down. All I'm using is 1.5 inch 18 gauge brad nails, and then she'll come in and come behind me and just wipe up any glue, and then you just get a screwdriver and on the side run it up and down the edge just to round over that 45 slightly, so you close those gaps up. After that's all done, the glue's inside is dried. I like to take a 220 grit and just put a very light sand on it, just to get any kind of glue spots that might have been on there, and just like I said, to break that edge a little bit better. Don't do any more, don't go any heavier than a 220, because eventually you will sand through that veneer, and it'll, unless you're painting it, it'll be ruined. So we decided on a provincial stain from Minwax, and we really liked the color that it turned out. We were going for something light, so, and I'll show you pictures at the end, kind of where the laundry room started and versus how we ended. But we wanted like a lighter tone with the darker green, and like I said, you'll see it in a little bit. But we chose this provincial from Minwax, and depending on what plywood you get will vary the color the stain comes out.